Well, like Blair said, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I always have fun at these events, especially when I get a chance to come down here. As Blair said, I was here, I think it was January of 2021, for those of you that were able to attend that event. And again, you're probably going to hear some of the same spiel that I gave back then, so if I do, forgive me. Maybe you forgot, but we'll kind of embellish it a little bit as we go. Likewise, I'd like to thank Blair for the invite. Again, he's not only become a business partner, he's become a true dear friend. I've been blessed to come here the last 2 years and go turkey hunting with him. So, and thanks to Blake, he's got some pretty prime property that we've been able to hunt on. So, likewise, Ethan. Man, if you've never eaten Ethan's food, you're in for a real treat. He is a true wizard when it comes to culinary arts. He's fantastic. So, thanks Ethan as well. So, before we taste the first offering we've got tonight, we've got 4 different offerings. Tell you a little bit about the story. You know, Chicken Cock whiskey, you know, I do tastings all over the world. And what do you think the first question is I get?
The name.
Where did you get that name? People look at me and kind of snicker and say, you know, I didn't create the name. You go back to 1856. The brand was actually founded in Paris, Kentucky in 1856. So it's an old brand. A gentleman by the name of James A. Miller built this distillery in Paris. And he was making a whiskey he was so proud of, he felt it was worth crowing about. So that's why he called it Chicken Cock whiskey. Now, you got to remember, 1856, Americans were still using the Old English language, and the term for a male chicken was a cock. The term rooster didn't come about till the early 1900s. Actually, you know, like so many words in the English language, we tend to bastardize them and create slang, and so that kind of happened with the word cock. And so I think the Puritans actually were a little offended, so they actually came out with the new word called rooster. So rooster actually came about in the early 1900s. So good little history lesson there. Anyhow, the brand did great up until 1920. 1920, Prohibition comes along, and there weren't but a handful of companies that had the money to afford a medicinal alcohol permit. So most of the distilleries shut down, like Chicken Cock. And so when the distillery shut down, they sold the brand to a company up in Montreal, Canada, and they made a rye whiskey. And they would bottle that whiskey under the Chicken Cock label, and then they would seal that bottle in a tin can. That tin can protected the bottle when they would bootleg it back across the border in the U.S. And so it showed up in a lot of speakeasies, but one of its claims to fame, it was the actual house whiskey at the Cotton Club in Harlem, New York, the most famous speakeasy during the 1920s. There's a book written about Duke Ellington, and in his memoirs, he talks about the tin can whiskey, Chicken Cock whiskey, being the house whiskey. Now, back then, I think it sold for somewhere around $14 a pint. 1920. So I think today's terms, that's somewhere around $140, I think. So, but so you know, the wealthy folks that could attend the Cotton Club, they could afford to drink, even though it was illegal. So that's part of its claim to fame. Prior to Prohibition being repealed, a couple years before Prohibition was repealed, a company by the name of National Distillers repurchased the brand back. They had a subsidiary that actually owned a medicinal alcohol permit. So they started a distillery back up in Paris, and they were making medicinal alcohol up until the time in 1933 when Prohibition was repealed. So a lot of neat history. After Prohibition was repealed, the brand did great. I mean, it had a really high quality reputation and was flourishing up until the 1950s. In the 1950s, the distillery had a fire and burnt to the ground. The company that owned at the time decided not to rebuild, and so the brand just sat idle. Fast forward 60 years to 2011. The founder of Grain and Barrel Spirits, Marty Antela, who owns Grain and Barrel Spirits, was looking for a whiskey brand. And so he did some research, and he ran across the history of Chicken Cock and found it pretty interesting. So he was able to acquire the brand rights. Now, Grain and Barrel Spirits is a very small company. You know, they don't have any operational assets. They don't have a distillery or bottling operation or whatever. And so he needed cash flow. And so the first thing he did, and when he bought the brand in 2011, he bottled it in an aluminum bottle, and he flavored it. They had, I think, a root beer flavor, a cinnamon flavor, a cherry flavor. It had different flavors. And again, it didn't help the quality reputation, but it served its purpose in creating cash flow. Then he came out with a Chicken Cock Heritage, which is bourbon, and Chicken Cock Bootlegger, which was a bourbon rye blend. And same thing. It was 6-month-old whiskey he was able to acquire pretty inexpensively and turn a profit on it fairly quick. So it served its purpose. It created a cash flow. I've been in this business 44 years. And as I tell them earlier, I know I started when I was 5, but that was in 1978. So, but yeah, it's 44 years, and I've worked with just about every company there is in the industry in different capacities, and have been very blessed. But 5 years ago this month, I actually decided to get out of the corporate rat race and ramp up my retirement plan. And that was not retire, but start my own consulting company. So I've got a number of different clients, but Grain and Barrel Spirits was one of the first companies I went to work for as a consultant. Helped them with some supply chain issues, some operational stuff. And Marty came to me one day and he says, you know, I have this vision. He says, I want to resurrect Chicken Cock whiskey back to Kentucky and bring it back to its high quality prominence it once had many, many years ago. And he said, you know, can you help me do that? And I said, I can help you do that under one condition. You stop buying that young shit and let's really focus on, you know, promoting the brand and getting it back to its high quality prominence. So that's what we've done in the last 5 years. Now, the first thing I did, I negotiated an agreement with a company called Bardstown Bourbon Company. People heard of them? Yeah. They're a great company, fairly young. They started making whiskey in 2016, but negotiated a contract with them. And there's distilleries out there that do contract distillation where they'll make whiskey, they'll put it in a barrel, and you can buy those barrels. Well, Bardstown Bourbon Company is a little bit different. They have what they call a collaborative distillation program. And through that program, I basically give them our mash bills. Our mash bill for our bourbon is 70% corn, 21% rye, 9% malted barley. Our rye mash bill is a 95% rye, 5% malted barley. But then I also give them the work instructions. I give them the time and temperatures I want to cook the grains. I give them the enzymes I want to use. I give them the specifications for fermentation, the beer chemistry, the distillation. And then when they make our whiskey, basically we're using their equipment, their employees. I go down and oversee the process. We laid down 1,000 barrels of bourbon in February and then another 200 barrels of rye in March. So again, we're small. I mean, we're not, you know, Jack Daniels is filling over 700,000 barrels a year. Jim Beam's filling over 1 million a year. So, you know, you can put things in perspective. We're just, I mean, we're smaller than a minnow in that ocean, okay? I mean, we're tiny. But I like being small. It gives me the opportunity to really focus my energy, my knowledge, my experience to one small brand and really pay attention to detail. So the other thing unique, and I told Blair to kind of give me the high sign when the meal's ready. The other thing that's unique about Chicken Cock that I don't think any other whiskey company in the U.S. anyway, actually in the world, can claim this. 12 of the 44 years I've been in the business, I worked for a company called Brown-Forman. You might recognize, they own Jack Daniels and a bunch of other stuff. Well, when I started my consulting company, well, back up, 9 of those 12 years, I actually managed their cooperage operations. So I not only made whiskey, aged whiskey, bottled and shipped whiskey, I've also made barrels. And I spent 9 years in that business. Now, 60 to 70% of the flavor in a bottle of whiskey comes from that white oak barrel. So it's such a critical component, okay? It's so critical. And most companies, for economic reasons, you know, they don't really, they're satisfied with the quality of whiskey they're able to get out of the barrel without going through as much detail as we do. So one of the other first clients I got was a group of guys in West Virginia. And they wanted to create a business to create jobs for an economically depressed area around White Sulphur Springs. West Virginia, boy. West Virginia. Anyhow, you know, I basically helped them build a cooperage. Before that, I helped them build a stave mill. I went down there and I trained their employees how to quarter saw white oak. I trained them how to cut staves and heading. I trained them how to edge them up properly, how to stack them so you get good airflow through the stacks. And then when they got I helped them design the cooperage, but when they got the cooperage built, I went down and I trained their employees how to build a quality barrel. Now, through that relationship for Chicken Cock, I go there in a year in advance. And I go through their log yard and I select the logs that we're going to use to cut into staves and heading to make the barrels for our whiskey the following year. So basically I have oversight from bark to barrel to bourbon to bottle. There's nobody else in this industry that I know of that can claim that. I don't have the experience or had the opportunity to work in all those facets. So something unique, and I'll get into some of the detail later on, maybe one-on-one. I'll tell you, what I'm looking for and why I'm looking for it. So let's go ahead. You've heard me talk enough, so let's go ahead and sample the first. Now this first rendition you're going to taste, this is our Chicken Cock Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. Now, first off, let me ask you, does all bourbon whiskey come from Kentucky?
No.
Okay. You'd be amazed. Well, some say all good bourbon, but that's beside the point. That's being a little particular. But
Some comes from Fernando County.
That's right. Actually, in 1964, the U.S. government passed a resolution proclaiming bourbon whiskey as a distinct product of the United States of America, not just Kentucky. So even though 95% of bourbon is made in Kentucky, you can make it anywhere in the U.S. So this first one I want you to smell it. Now this is our Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. While our whiskey was aging in the warehouse, I laid it down. We made our first whiskey in 2017. So I laid it down. It's been aging. While that was aging, part of my job, I go out and I try to find good quality whiskey that we could put under the Chicken Cock label to bridge the gap until ours became a proper age. So this one is actually predominantly our 4-year-old that we laid down in 2017, blended with a little bit of 7-year-old, a little bit of 15-year-old. It's 90 proof, and well, you've seen the bottles. Those of you who haven't seen the bottles that we're giving away tonight as well, those bottles are actually replicas of pre-prohibition bottles that Chicken Cock was bottled in. Back then they were pint sizes, but we just blew them up to a 750. Blair's holding one up there. Now if you look closely, see the honeycomb embossing on the outside of that glass? That's chicken wire. So again, that bottle is actually a pre-prohibition bottle that we just blew up to a 750. And we've got another one you'll see with the Island Roosters, the same thing. It's a pre-prohibition bottle. So back to the bourbon. So pick the bourbon up.
So it's blended with that.
15 and 7. Yeah. Yeah, so this is some of the first, this is the first 4-year-old that we laid down that I was responsible for, blended with a little bit of 7 and some 15-year-old. 90 proof. Now, I don't like to tell you, oh yeah, you should smell this and you should taste this. I mean, I'm sorry. I tell people when I do tasting, this is not an exam. There is no wrong or right answer. What you smell or what you taste is going to be totally different than the people next year, the table next year. So smell it, tell me what you drunk. And again, I'm a big boy, I've been doing this a long time. You're not going to hurt my feelings if you don't like it or if you're smelling something that I don't, so.
Vanilla.
I'd say vanilla, okay, yeah. Anybody else smell anything unique? They're picking up something strong? Yeah, once you nose it, go ahead and put it to the palate. Coat your tongue real good. And kind of let it sit there. And just swallow it down there, man. Kind of get it on all the way to the back taste buds.
Light.
Light? Yeah. I mean, some people say, woo, I feel a little warmth. Feel a little warmth there? Well, what I try to do, I purposely select the proof that we're going to bottle at. I actually take the whiskey and I start knocking it down with using reverse osmosis water till I get to the point where the alcohol burn kind of subsides and allows the flavors to kind of overtake the profile. And so actually our bourbon and our rye, we bottle it at 90 proof. Now we could bottle it at 80 proof and get a heck of a lot more bottles out of the barrel and save a lot of money. But again, we are focused on bringing it back to its high quality provenance. So that's why it's bottled at 90 proof. Now, again, most people won't get a burn. You still get that little warm Kentucky hug, but it's not really a burn. And that's what I like. I mean, I want you to taste it, smell it, understand what you're tasting and smelling, but as you drink it and you swallow it, you get that little warmth. Ready for the first?
It's good.
So I think they're getting ready to bring out the first course. If not, I mean, I can talk all night. So this is some of my friends know. 5 minutes. Okay, so tell you what, let me tell you a little bit about what I look for And when I go out to West Virginia, and I'm selecting logs, okay? I was out there in March, and usually I got to wear my muck boots because you walk out in a log yard, you're going to sink in mud. I don't care if it's had rain for a week, you're still going to sink in mud. And so I'm out there and I'm looking for extremely tight grain oak. Now, tight grain by industry standard, basically if you look at the end of the log, you see the annual growth rings. Tight grain oak means at least 10 annual growth rings per inch. Well, the white oak grown in those Appalachian mountains, they're averaging 12 to 15 growth rings per inch, okay? And so it makes my job a lot easier. It's such a high percentage of tight grain, I don't have to call out too many logs, but I do call out some that don't quite meet that criteria. The reason I'm picking such tight grain oak, it gives me a much higher density, a much higher concentration of the chemical composition that's in that oak that I can convert into flavors. You take one of these barrels, this Jack Daniel barrel right there, 53 gallon, that's a standard 53 gallon barrel. If you measure the circumference around the belly, the bilge of the barrel, it's 81 inches. You take 12 to 15 annual growth rings times that 81 inches, that's over 1,000 years of growth rings in one barrel. Just kind of puts it into perspective how much flavor is available to really convert into the great flavors. So, I help these guys build the cooperage. So when I go out there, pick the logs, we cut the staves and heading, we stack them, and we're gonna leave them outside for at least usually 9 to 12 months. I want them to sit outside in the rain and the snow and the wind and the hot and the cold. And what that does, it starts creating a fungal growth on the outside of the wood. And within that fungus, there's microbial activity that takes place and starts degrading the cellular structure of the wood. What that does, it opens up the grain. And when that rain hits it or the snow and the wind hits it, it leaches out a lot of the harsher tannic acid and a lot of the bitter phenolic compounds that you don't want to impart in the flavor in your whiskey. So it's a critical component to not only leach out those undesirable flavors, but open up the grain a little bit. Being such tight grain, I want to open that grain up. When we build that barrel, there's an important part. We go a little bit step further. We not only natural air dry our wood. When it comes in, they'll equalize it in the pre-dryer to 9 to 14% moisture so they can actually machine it cleanly without tearing it. But then, when they build a barrel, they'll take the staves, which is the side of the barrel, and they'll put them in a temporary hoop and build a barrel. And then they'll run it through a steam tunnel. And the barrel looks like this. And they run it through a steam tunnel. And when it's hot and it's moist, then this big cone comes down and pulls the staves together and it bends the staves. So they put a temporary truss hoop on both ends. We're going to toast that barrel, a medium plus toast, and we're going to char it later in the process. Now, why do we toast it up front? Well, number one, we just opened up that grain, so I can get heat really deep into that wood. One of the reasons white oak is used, it contains cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. Cellulose is the primary cellular structure that makes wood hard and strong. Hemicellulose is where the wood sugars are, polysaccharides. And think back to chemistry class. You took sugar in a spoon, you held it over a Bunsen burner. What did it do? Start melting and caramelizing on you. That's where your caramel flavors are coming from in your whiskeys. Likewise, the lignin. When you heat that barrel up and you toast it, deep penetrating toast, the lignin gets converted into vanillin. And that's where your vanilla flavors come from. So caramel and vanilla are two predominant flavors in most good whiskeys. And that's where they're coming from, in addition to other esters and other phenolic compounds that are desirable in the flavor during that process. So we're going to toast it a medium plus toast. And I go out there about a week and a half where we're scheduled to make our bourbon or our rye. I go back out to West Virginia, and I'm there to oversee the building of the barrels, the toasting of the barrels, and the charring. Now, we use a number 3 level char. There's 4 levels of char, 4 being the heaviest. Number 3 is a little bit lighter. All I'm trying to do is blister the surface, because I just created a bunch of great flavor. The last thing I want to do is burn it away. So I just blister the surface so I get good charcoal filtering and good penetration of the whiskey into the wood during the heat of the summers. The heat of the summers, the air space in that barrel expands and it pushes that whiskey through that char layer, and it picks up all those great caramel and vanilla flavors inside that wood. And then in the wintertime, it cools down, it contracts back out, and that's kind of a day-night temperature change too. It's moving in and out of that wood. You know, this time of year we're talking about the temperatures here, In Kentucky area, we've already had a couple days over 100 degrees, and we've probably had at least 12 days over 90. And so that's great for mature whiskey. People say, oh, it's so hot. I say, no, it's great. I love it. They're just making good whiskey. So the next whiskey you're going to taste is our, you guys need some, don't you? I think you're coming around pouring still. So this one here, this was actually produced, and this was our first collaboration with Bardstown Bourbon Company. So this was actually, I was responsible for this one. It was actually made at Bardstown. It's actually 4 years old. And this is our Chicken Cock Kentucky Straight Rye Whiskey. Now, again, the mash bill on this one is 95% rye, 5% malted barley. Again, this one as well is at 90 proof, in the same package as the bourbon was actually, same bottle. I'll tell you a little story. I've been in this business 44 years, and 10 of the 44 years, I was vice president of Austin Nichols and the managing director at Wild Turkey Distillery. Anybody know Jimmy Russell or Eddie Russell? They both worked for me. Great guys. I mean, Jimmy's like a brother to me, and I think the world of him. I still try to talk to him at least every other month anyhow. His health's not doing real good right now, but super guy. Anyhow, we made a rye whiskey, and I was weaned on bourbon. I've always been a bourbon drinker, and I wasn't a big fan of rye. We made a rye, we didn't make a lot of it, but it had like 35% corn in the mash bill, and it just gave it a harshness and bitterness that didn't agree with my palate. So I never was a big fan of the rye that we made. But when we decided to come out with the Chicken Cock rye, I kind of did a little research in that and tasted a bunch of these 95.5s and said, wow, these are spectacular. And so that's kind of how we kind of hung on the 95.5 recipe, and I kind of tweaked it a little bit with some of the procedures that we use. But I'm so proud of this rye. I mean, it gets accolades all over the place. And I usually drink my whiskey either straight or on the rocks. But a friend of mine introduced me to an old fashioned made with this rye. If you like old fashions, you have got to try it with this Kentucky Straight Chicken Cock rye. It's so good, so good. So again, this is 90 proof, and they're still pouring here, so I'll keep talking. Quick story about Wild Turkey, by the way. Any of you people like Russell's Reserve? No, that's a good thing. So, which Russell do you think created that? Jimmy Russell? Wrong answer. I know Jimmy too, but Greg Snyder created that brand. When I was managing director, seriously, it is amazing. It's really good bourbon, especially for the price. It's hard to beat for the price, but I wanted to pay tribute to what I think is one of the greatest master distillers that ever walked this earth. And so I told Pernod Ricard, who owned Wild Turkey that time, I said, we got an excess of older whiskey. I said, we need to come out with a new brand, and it's time this company paid tribute to one of the greatest master distillers, Jimmy Russell. And they said, yeah, that's a good idea. Well, what do you call it? I said, well, for lack of a better name, we call it Russell's Reserve. And Jimmy didn't know anything about this. It was all a surprise to him. So I was at a meeting in New York City at the corporate offices that day. Got back on Monday to the distillery, and of course I always hooked up with Jimmy early on when he got to the plant there. I said, Jimmy, as I recall, we've got some great 10-year-old whiskey on the fourth floor of B Warehouse. You get time today, how about running up there and grabbing a sample out of one of those barrels, and let's try it. I said, the company's thinking about coming out with a new brand. I said, okay. So that day I had a meeting with the union, and we were just wrapping up things, and hear this knock on the door. And Jimmy kind of opens my office door and says, Greg, you got a minute? I said, yeah, come on in, Jimmy. We're just wrapping up. And he says, here's that bourbon you wanted to try. I said, oh, great. So he had a little snifter glass, and I grabbed it out of his hand, and I got it about a foot from my nose. And man, the caramel about knocked my head off. It was so sweet and caramel flavored, vanilla. I mean, it was phenomenal. Just the nose was amazing. And he kind of Jimmy wouldn't cuss if he had a mouthful, but he just kind of grinned and gave me that little nod like, that's pretty good stuff. And so, anyhow, again, he didn't know anything about it, and so that was the bourbon we used, and we came out with it. It was in the old genuine tall Wild Turkey bottle, and it was called Wild Turkey's Russell's Reserve. It was a gold screen printed bottle, and it was 101 proof. Now, a couple years later, after Pernod Ricard and Diageo bought Seagram's, we had some guys from Seagram's move into marketing positions, and they like to make a name for themselves. That's when they put it in the short squatty bottle and knocked it down to 90 proof. But anyhow, the brand's done great, and it's still delicious bourbon. But anyhow, I work with packaging and marketing, and we put together the package. And later on, we had a little presentation for Jimmy, and he shed a couple of tears over that. He was pretty proud of that. But and to this day, it's just the brand's doing great, and Jimmy and Eddie get credit for it, as they should. Their names, Russell, their names on it, right? So, anyway, true story. So, okay, I think everybody's got their rye now. All right, so again, this is rye. Give it a nose. Mine's over here somewhere. I guess I'll catch up when I.
You know it's like
I've smelled it a couple times, yeah. Smell the spicy, peppery notes. What are you smelling? It's definitely different than bourbon. There's a lot of people, I tell you what, a lot of people come in, oh, I don't want to try, I do tastings, so I don't want to try that, right? I'm not a dry drinker. I said, just try it. I said, wow, that's amazing. Oh, bless you, thank you. What do you get with rye? Sometimes you get that grassiness, from the rye. Spicy. So give it a taste. Again, it's still got a little bit of that Kentucky. I see few people love it because they're shedding a tear, but that's all right. Definitely different flavors. Again, if you like old fashions, you have got to try an old fashioned with this stuff. It is phenomenal. It is phenomenal. Thoughts, comments, good or bad? Like I said, I'm a big boy. I can take it. Don't hurt me a bit.
almost tastes like a Manhattan.
Taste of Manhattan? Yeah. Well, yeah. I tell you what, Manhattan, and I said old fashions, it makes killer cocktails. I'm telling you, it's so good.
It's just a little hotter, but it's not. I mean, it's good. It's like pleasant.
A little more Kentucky hug, you telling me?
Yeah, it gets you a little bit sooner.
More like a Kentucky squeeze, huh?
Heat stays around longer.
Pardon?
Heat stays around longer.
I'm sorry.
The heat of this sticks with you.
Oh yeah, yeah. You kind of feel it.
I like it. Stays there. Right? Enjoy it.
It'll warm the cockles of your heart.
Yes, this is a great thing. I like rye.
Oh yeah.
I've never had this.
No?
I had the old fashioned.
Yeah. Good. Any questions about what I've talked about thus far? Because I'm going to keep talking and probably more than you want to hear, but I'm just curious.
Put the rye in the same barrels you get from West Virginia.
Yes. I use the same specifications for our bourbon and our rye in the barrels.
It does not have to be a white oak.
Yes, so that's a good question. I had the question asked earlier. So, what is a bourbon whiskey, and can you reuse the barrels? Okay.
Yep.
In 1938, shortly after Prohibition was repealed, our industry was regulated by the Treasury Department, because there's a lot of tax dollars involved, a bunch. And so they came out with a rule book. It's about that thick. Of course, you can pick it up online now, but it's about that thick, and it's called the Code of Federal Regulations. And if you flip through that book and you find the section that talks about standards of identity, within those standards of identity, our U.S. government defines what a bourbon whiskey is. A bourbon whiskey has 4 primary criteria. Number 1, it has to have at least 51% corn in the mash bill. Number 2, it can't come off the still higher than 160 proof. Number 3, it has to be aged in a new charred oak barrel, not a used barrel, a new charred oak barrel. And number 4, it cannot go into a barrel higher than 125 proof. So as long as it meets those 4 criteria, it's bourbon day one. It goes into that new barrel. Now, if you meet 3 of those criteria and you put it in a used barrel, you can't call it bourbon. You can call it whiskey, or American whiskey, or wherever, where it's made in the U.S., but you can't call it bourbon. Same thing with rye. The only difference, rye has to have those same 4 criteria, only it has to be at least 51% rye in the mash bill. Question?
What whiskey or bourbon is out there with 62.5% alcohol?
I'm sorry, what?
So bourbon out there has got the 62 62.5% alcohol.
So what bourbon has 62.5% alcohol? It's a good question, because that's 125 proof, right? There are some bourbons out there that have 65% alcohol.
Really?
You ever seen a bottle of Booker's? Booker's? Booker, no. He was the master distiller at Jim Beam for many, many years. A dear friend of mine, actually.
Coy Hill, Jack Daniels down there, 141.
Coy Hill. So, but they still follow, Jack Daniels still follows the bourbon criteria.
Yeah.
Now, why is that? Because I said, you can't put it in higher than 125 proof, can you? So a lot depends on where that barrel is aged, where it's stored in the warehouse. Most barrels are aged in the old Rick-style warehouses. You know, they're 6, 7 floors high, and they lay the barrel on the side and they roll it into the racks. And then they stop when the bung comes up. They actually clock that barrel so they know when the bung is around 12 o'clock. Because that bung's at 6 o'clock, and that barrel's expanding and contracting in the summer and winter, and that bung blows, they lost every drop of it. So they purposely clock that barrel so when it stops, and it's going to sit there in the rick, it's up at 12 o'clock. So in those warehouses, if you put that whiskey in the top floors, it's a hell of a lot hotter. If you go to Kentucky right now, I think it was 98 degrees when I talked to my son earlier, 98 degrees, and you walk in the first floor of a Rick-style warehouse in Kentucky, you're thinking, oh man, air conditioned, this is nice. Those warehouses aren't air conditioned. There's no climate control, but it's cool. It's cooler than it is outside. Ethanol vapors are heavier than air. And as the whiskey evaporates out of the barrels, all those ethanol vapors settle on the lower floors of the warehouse. It's like an alcohol bath. So when you walk into a whiskey warehouse in Kentucky in the summertime, it's cool on the first floor. And that's why. It's an alcohol bath. There's ethanol vapors are down there. Now, the barrels at the top of the floors, it's going to be 10 to 15 degrees hotter up at the top because most of them have like a metal clad siding on it. And it intensifies the heat and the cold during the various seasons. A water molecule is smaller than an ethanol molecule. And so it's hot, less humid up there, and that water molecule will find its way out before the ethanol molecule will find its way out. And the proof increases in the barrels up in the top floor. Conversely, the barrels on the lower floor, it's humid, it's cool, and so it's moist outside, and that water molecule is a theory of equilibrium. That water molecule says, well, it's moist, it's humid outside. I'm going to stay here in the barrel. I don't need to leave. And the ethanol molecule find its way out, and the proof lowers on the lower floors. So ideally, they say the center cut, 6, 7 floor, the 3 to 5 floor, 3, 4, 5 level floors, those are ideal for maturation. And that's part of the beauty with my relationship to folks at Bardstown Bourbon Company. I'm the only non-employee at Bardstown Bourbon Company that has a pass key to every building in there. I've got such a great relationship with them. They let me take tours and I get to do all kinds of stuff there. But they also let me cherry pick where I want to age my barrels. I mean, Carrie Hutchins, the lady that manages the warehouse, she's a sweetheart, but she takes good care of old Greg when he wants to pick a spot in the warehouse. So. Let me tell you a little bit about this third rendition you're going to taste tonight. Mentioned every year we do what we call a couple of LTOs, limited time offerings. And last year, 2021, I met with the founder of the company. I said, I really like the spicy, peppery notes of our rye, but I think it would be greatly enhanced if we could add a little sweetness to it. And he thought about it. I said, yeah, that's probably a pretty good idea, but how would we do that? And I said, well, let me buy some rum barrels, and we'll finish our rye in some rum barrels. So I bought 25 rum barrels. Now, I know some of you people are going to say, okay, well, where'd you get the rum barrels? And my only answer I can give you is the Caribbean. Okay? Had to sign a non-disclosure, so I can't tell you the company it came from. But I can tell you it's Caribbean rum, and it was actually sugarcane based, not molasses based. It was sugarcane based rum, so really good rum. But anyhow, these rum barrels showed up at the distillery last May of 2021. And they called me the day they were supposed to arrive. So I went down there, they arrived, I climbed up on the trailer, and I pulled the bung out of each barrel, and I nosed each barrel to make sure that, these barrels hadn't been sitting in a port somewhere and turned sour and rancid and nasty. every one of them is really nice, sweet smelling, freshly dumped rum barrels. And so I put our rye whiskey in those barrels. And I let it age. Well, first off, you got to be real careful. Anytime you finish a whiskey in a secondary barrel, the last thing you want to do is allow that secondary barrel to overpower the flavor of the base whiskey. All you want to do with that secondary barrel is just enhance the flavor a little bit. And so I tasted it every month. And I wanted to make sure that we didn't overpower it with sweetness or rum flavor. And after 6 months, I said, boom, that's it. Let's dump those barrels. It's got all the sweetness it needs. I don't want any more sweetness, any more rum flavor. And so after 6 months, which was November of last year, 2021, we dumped those barrels and we stored them in a tank. It was barrel proof, so we stored it in a tank. And Grain and Barrel Spirits didn't want to bottle it until the first quarter of this year. So this was actually bottled the last day of February in Bardstown. And so that sat in the tank, which really doesn't do anything to the whiskey, it just sits there. But it had enough sweetness. Now, for this one, remember I told you earlier, I try to determine what proof we're going to bottle it at. So I actually kind of did the reverse. I took it down to 90 proof. I actually took it down to 86 proof, and it was way over diluted. Bumped it to 90 proof, still too diluted. Bumped it to 92 proof, still too diluted. 93 proof, too diluted. At 95 proof, boom. Those flavors popped and they really overtook the profile. And so this product you're tasting is actually 95 proof. But this one's called Chicken Cock Island Rooster. Very limited edition. I don't know if we've got it. Mark, we still got any in, or are we getting more? It's sold out? Yeah. So, you got a special tasting because I don't think you can buy this bottle anywhere. Not all states, we only did like, oh, there you go.
We got bottles, so you can get 2 ounce pours on tap.
Yeah, I hear that. What's that? You got to negotiate that with Blair. So. But this package, actually, again, this is our other package. We have 2 bottle packages. See that Starburst embossing on there? That's what we call our Starburst bottle. But this, again, this was a pre-prohibition bottle that Chicken Cock was bottling. It was only a pint size back then, but we blew it up to 750. And see the metal? It's called a jigger cap. Shot glass. Yeah. But yeah, it's a beautiful package, and it's called Chicken Cock Island Rooster, 95 proof. Okay. So they sold out, but as soon as it hit Florida, hit the warehouse, Mark had it sold, okay? It was a very limited edition. Some states didn't get any. Yeah, you drank a little bit, not that much. Now, the good news is, after I dumped those rum barrels, it had so much flavor still in those rum barrels, I refilled them with rye. So we got a second round coming. And actually, I was down in Bardstown last Monday, and they were bottling it last Monday. So it actually aged 7 months the second time to get comparable in sweetness and that. So there's going to be a second round coming. I think suggested SRP somewhere around, again, it's suggested our SRP is around $200 a bottle. But it is so good. So again, nose it first. Can you smell the rum, the sweetness in it? Again, all I was trying to do was just enhance the spicy, peppery notes with a little sweetness. Go ahead when you're ready. Go ahead and throw it past your lips and on your tongue. If that's not slap your mama good, I don't know what is, man. I'm telling you what. Huh? That's my new favorite after dinner drink. You know, I'm not a big sweets guy, but when I get done with a great meal, I'll pour some of that in a Glencairn, and if it's hot out like this, I'll put maybe 1 ice cube in it and go sit out by my pool, and life's good. I'm telling you, you can't beat it. It's so good. What do you think? Give you a little Kentucky hug here too, didn't it? Good. And we've done a lot of different different renditions. I think the last time I may have talked about some of those. Actually, I think we tried one of them. Did we do, help me out here, those that went to the last taste, did we do the Chicken Cock Righteous Blonde, or was it Chicken Cock Beer Barrel Select, one of those? I don't remember, but we've done 2 collaborations with a beer company in Louisville called Goodwood Brewing Company, and we gave them empty bourbon barrels. They put their bourbon, first one they did a walnut brown ale, the second one they put a blonde ale in it. The first one I put bourbon in it after they dumped the beer out of it, and we finished it in the beer barrel with the walnut brown ale, and we called that Chicken Cock Beer Barrel Select. Really good. I think the flavors of the bourbon really melded well with the walnut brown beer, the nutty flavors. The second one, we gave them 6 empty bourbon barrels, freshly dumped, and they put a blonde ale in it. And 8 weeks later, they dumped the beer out. This time, I put a rye in it, and 6 months later, I dumped the rye out, and we called that one Chicken Cock Righteous Blonde. It was spelled R-Y-E-T-E-O-U-S, Righteous was. So kind of give a little hint that, hey, it's rye whiskey, you know. The Trade and Tax Bureau that regulates our industry, they're kind of funny about, you're not supposed to call it rye whiskey. You could say rye whiskey finished in a beer barrel, but you can't call it rye whiskey. So we got Righteous Blonde and got the rye on there legally. So. Best one so far. You know, of course, I'm kind of partial. I like them all, but I'm telling you what, this one is so special. Again, these limited time, they're kind of fun to play with. You kind of use the memory banks. You know, somebody says, wow, you know so much. And now I'm just a slow learner. I've been doing this 44 years, and it takes me a while. But it's, you know, I've been so blessed. When I worked at Brown-Forman, I was a part of their maturation committee. You ever heard of Lincoln Henderson? Lincoln was the original master distiller for Woodford Reserve. And then when he retired from Brown-Forman, he was one of the co-founders of Angel's Envy. But Lincoln passed away with cancer a number of years ago, but a dear friend of mine. But Lincoln was on the maturation committee, and another guy by the name of Willie Pratt. Willie was the original master distiller for Michter's when Michter's came back to life and that. But he was on that, and we had a great team on that maturation committee, and we did so many different experiments and research projects with barrels and whiskeys and formulas and you name it. But it was so cool to experience that and be on that team, because we had some brilliant people on that team that had seen and done far more than I had ever done. But to go through there and experience that and do the research and the innovation we did, it kind of opens your eyes to new things. And so some of these LTOs we're doing, they're pretty innovative. I'll tell you about the last one you're going to taste here in a little bit. But kind of give you a little heads up. This last one's actually in a tin can, basically. And we're actually going to be doing a 3-can series. So this one this year. Thanks, Blair. And I'll tell you the story about this when it comes to it. But this year, this is the first 10-can series that came out. October, November, later this year, our second 10-can series is coming out. And then October, November, December of 2023, the third and final 10-can series. So anybody that are collectors out there, I mean, this is something you might want to put on your collection. They're not cheap. I think SRP around this is around $499.99, so I always round up to $500. So, but you're going to get to taste it. You know, out of the goodness of Blair's heart, he's going to let you taste it. Now, if you go to the bar tonight and you want a shot of that, that might be a little steep, but part of the price of admission night, you're going to get to taste it. So, but it is unique. It's unique, and I'll tell you about it here when we grab your pour. Set or you need? Good. Okay, we got a couple minutes more. So, any other questions? I keep rambling that, but I kind of like some of the questions I've been getting.
I got a question.
All right, Blair's got a question.
Drink bourbon for a living?
Do I drink bourbon for a living?
Drink bourbon for a living. When was the last time you were actually
See, I watched the Tampa Bay Lightning play last night, so it went into overtime. So, you know, and I was drinking the whole game, so I went into overtime. So that's all I can tell you. I won't say I was drunk because I was in my hotel room, and nobody could witness it, so it didn't happen. Now, it's funny. People say, "Oh man, you must drink every night." Well, not every night, but pretty darn close. And I was blessed when I worked for Wild Turkey, and I'd go on some promotional events with Jimmy Russell, and not a lot, but I've been in New York City. Hell, I was with Jimmy at an airport one time in Japan, and we're just walking to the gate and going to our next flight, and all of a sudden, here comes half a dozen people. "Oh, Mr. Russell, Mr. Russell!" And I mean, he's an icon. I mean, Jimmy was so cool, and it was kind of neat being around him. Again, Jimmy worked for me, right? And so every year we were big sponsors of the National Wild Turkey Federation. Makes sense, Wild Turkey Bourbon, National Wild Turkey Federation. I'm a Diamond Life member. I've been a member for many, many years, and I know Blair has been as well. And that's something I love about Blair. He lets me come down here and turkey hunt with him every couple of years, so it's good. But anyhow, we would always go to the Grand National Calling Champion, or the annual convention. Now, nowadays it's held most years in Nashville, but it was held in Charlotte, being Columbus, Ohio, Louisville, Indianapolis. But most every year now it's in Nashville. And I go to these events, and we'd always, part of our sponsorship, we sponsor the Grand National Calling Championships. And so it was fun. Jimmy and I get to go up on stage and hand out the trophies and the prize money and that. So I got to know a lot of the callers and learned a lot from them as well. But it was neat. And again, Jimmy worked for me for 10 years. But we go to events, and Jimmy he'd light up a room. We go into a bar. We go down to, I don't know, Tootsie's or whatever, somewhere downtown Nashville, and Wild Horse Saloon. We went there quite often. And we'd walk in there, and man, people say, "Oh, Jimmy Russell." And they come up to him, and everybody wants to buy Jimmy a drink, and then they find out I'm with them, so I got a drink too, So, I mean, there's no telling how many bottles of bourbon we consumed night after night after night. But you kind of build up a tolerance for it. People ask, I go to the hospital, they said, "What's your blood type?" I said, "About 90 proof." So, but yeah. So it's funny. We go there, and people, man, they just get enamored with Jimmy, and they put my arm around me and said, "Man, Greg, you're the luckiest guy in the world." I said, "Yeah, how's that?" He said, "Oh man, to be able to work for a guy like Jimmy, that's pretty special." And I just grinned. I said, "You're darn right it is. It's special." But yeah, he's a good guy, and again, I've been very blessed. I mean, 44 years. And not only Jimmy Russell, but Booker No. Booker No was a dear friend of mine. Elmer T. Lee was a dear friend of mine. Parker Beam. I mean, there's so many guys. And Jimmy's the last of the true Mohicans. He's the last of the real master distillers that grew up with corn dust under their fingernails, by making this stuff. But I've been so blessed. And when I get around those guys as a young guy, I just turn into a sponge and soak up all I could, because those guys were something special. And I could sit there and tell you stories all night long about those guys, because they were the true old guard, and they knew how to make whiskey. So I believe Rain and Megan are pouring this last rendition, the fourth one of tonight. So let me tell you a little bit about this one. I think I've told you the story about when Prohibition hit. Did I not?
Yeah.
Do the right spot so I can get feedback here. And so, quite honestly, I had nothing to do with this one. This one actually was the brainchild of the founder of Grain and Barrel Spirits. Monty Antle is his name, and Monty wanted to pay homage to the brand 100 years ago, during the 1920s, when it was a house whiskey at the Cotton Club in Harlem, New York. And so, through his contacts, he found some 20-year-old Canadian rye. And he was able to acquire that 20-year-old Canadian rye. And basically it's bottled at 100 proof. When you taste it, you would swear that's not 100 proof, but it's 100 proof. And again, he wanted to pay tribute to the brand back when it was a Canadian whiskey and was a house whiskey at the Cotton Club. So this one is called Chicken Cock Cotton Club Canadian Rye. It's 20-year-old Canadian rye. This one, just to kind of give you an idea, the SRP on this one is $500 a bottle. Very limited Very limited, but it's a collector's item. Remember I was talking earlier about the tins? Okay. This is number one of a series of 3 tins. At the end of this year, during the holidays this year, our second rendition, we got a product coming out. It's going to be called Chicken Cock Chanticleer. Excuse my French, I took German in school, but Chanticleer. Chanticleer means rooster in French. Okay? Now, think about that. There's a lot of French connection with the bourbon industry. Do you know where bourbon whiskey got its name? Anybody?
Bourbon County.
Bourbon County, Kentucky. So, a little history lesson here. In 1783, the American Revolutionary War ended. Had it not been for the French and the Spanish, the Americans would have never defeated the British. They helped with financing, they helped with guns, they helped with ammunition. They were such big supporters of the American militia that thanks to France and Spain, the Americans were able to defeat the British. So in 1786, Virginia was a commonwealth. And at that time, Virginia wasn't a state yet. Virginia actually not only encompassed what we know today as Virginia, but it also included West Virginia and a big chunk of Kentucky. And that was known as Virginia Commonwealth. So the Virginia Commonwealth wanted to pay tribute and honor the France for helping out with the war. The ruling family in France at that time was the Bourbon family. And so they created Bourbon County. So shortly thereafter, Virginia ratifies the Constitution, they become a state. In 1792, Kentucky ratified the Constitution and they became a state. Now, when they became a state, they kind of redefined the boundary lines, and so the footprint of Kentucky back in 1792 became a state is the same footprint as it is now. When it became a state, there were 9 counties in Kentucky. Okay, today there's 120, but 9 counties when Kentucky became a state. And Bourbon County, or Bourbon County, was the eastern 20% of the state. It was huge. So back in that day, immigrants that had, whiskey making in their bloodlines and so forth, they were moving in, heading west. The government had some land grants and some incentives to move west. How they made it through those Appalachian Mountains, I'll never know. God, without a major thoroughfare, I don't know how the hell they could have made it through it. That's some steep, rough mountains. But they made it through, and once they got into Kentucky, man, they had these rolling hills and fertile soil where they could grow grains, and they had the great water with the limestone beds to make great whiskey. And likewise, they had the temperatures, 6 months of cold temperatures, 6 months of warm temperatures, which is ideal for aging whiskey, and that's why 95% of bourbon's actually made in Kentucky. So anyhow, a lot of these settlers settled there in Bourbon County. Like I said, at that time, it was a 20% of the whole eastern half of, just about the whole eastern half of Kentucky. And so they'd make whiskey, they'd put it in a barrel, and then they put it on boats and make it to the Ohio River. And they float down the Ohio River, they get to the Mississippi River. And they float down the Mississippi River, and they go to New Orleans, and that whiskey got distributed all over the world. People kept saying, hey, I want some more of that whiskey from Bourbon County. I want some more of that whiskey from Bourbon County. I want some more of that bourbon whiskey. And so that's how bourbon whiskey actually got its name. Make sense? So that's part of the French connection. The other part of the French connection, you know what the county seat of Bourbon County is? Because Bourbon County still exists today in Kentucky. It's much smaller, though. It's just a little bit north. If you know where Lexington is, a little bit northeast of Lexington. But you know what the county seat is of Bourbon County? Paris, Kentucky. And guess where Chicken Cock was originated? Paris, Kentucky, in 1856. So kind of full circle, kind of French connection thing. So anyhow, later this year, we're coming out with our second tin rendition. It's called Chicken Cock Chanticleer. And what it is, it's bourbon that I'm finishing in cognac barrels. I'm telling you what, I was down at the distillery on Monday, and it's been in the barrels now a little over 3 months. And with cognac's pretty overpowering. You got to be real careful that you don't leave it in those barrels very long. I said, boom, it's ready. I smelled it at barrel proof, and it was about 123 proof. And I mean, and you wouldn't think this with cognac, because cognac's a great distillate, right? It had such a butterscotch smell. I mean, it's a butterscotch bomb. And so it's going to be bottled at 112 proof. But again, it's going to be also offered in a tin can. And it's going to be the second. I don't know what the SRP is yet. I don't think they've determined that, but it's going to be pretty hefty, I'm sure. Again, very limited, but it's going to be awesome. I mean, the flavors are spectacular. So again, this is a Chicken Cock Cotton Club. So pick it up. Let's nose it. Oh, let me, before you do that. So the third, I was telling you about the 3 series of the tin cans. So the third one's coming out October, November, December of 2023. And we haven't started on it yet. Actually, I have started on it. I mean, I reached out. There is a winery on the central coast of California that makes the most spectacular Syrah wine. If you like a red Syrah, oh my God, the flavors of this red Syrah are awesome. So I'm trading them some bourbon barrels for some wine Syrah barrels. And we're going to finish our bourbon in the Syrah barrels. And that's going to be our third rendition. And we don't have a name yet for it, but kind of just give you future what it's going to look like for the brand. But, so this one, again, is Chicken Cock. I left mine over there, that's fine. This is Chicken Cock Cotton Club. It's a 20-year-old Canadian rye. Now nose it first. I tell people, this does not smell like a rye, does not taste like a rye. And I'm sitting there trying to think. Now, first off, before I get into it, notice the color. See how light color it is? All right, I'm going to throw you back because I give you hair. Oh, thank you, sweetheart. See how light color this is? Throw back to Prohibition time. 1920 Prohibition hits, right? And there's only a handful of distilleries that could afford a medicinal alcohol permit. So most of the distilleries in the U.S. shut down. Well, when the distillery shut down, so did the barrel manufacturing operation, the cooperages, because they just lost their customer base. So that forced Canadian distilleries to start aging their whiskey in used barrels. And even today, most Canadian whiskeys are aged in used barrels. Every time you use that barrel, there's less color to extract, there's less flavor to extract, so it gets softer and softer. Most Canadian whiskeys, I've heard them using used barrels up to 5, maybe 6 times, depends. I mean, they're, you're just reusing barrels, so the cost of a new barrel, it's over half the cost to make a gallon of whiskey. So it's a big part of the cost component. So Canadian whiskeys were using used barrels. So ever since then, they've been able to. Now, remember earlier, I said a rye whiskey made in the U.S. has to be aged in a new charred oak barrel? Not Canada. This is a 20-year-old Canadian rye. Based on the color, I'd say that was probably the 3rd time that barrel was used. And so it sat in that barrel for 20 years. And that's what you got. It's a much softer, like I said, fruity floral notes on the nose, but the flavors as well. It's the most unique whiskey I've ever tasted. It really is interesting. So nose it, taste it, give me your thoughts. Did you get one? Did you get one?
Yes.
Okay. It's different, isn't it? This is the 100 proof. So again, Marty, the founder, he wanted to kind of throw it back to the era, and that's what it was back in the 1920s. So, what do you think? Pretty different, isn't it? Now, like most whiskeys, I mean, if it's got a little bit too much heat for you, or sometimes you just put a drop of water in it or an ice cube and just give it a second. I mean, it opens up a whole different complexity of flavor sometimes, but. Like it, not like it, because not everybody likes it, especially when they see the price tag on it.
It's like cotton candy.
Cotton candy. I've heard that before. I told guys, first time I smelled it and tasted, I did 2 weeks ago, I was up in Wisconsin, and hell, I signed over 180 bottles that week of chicken cock that people loved. And Man, those people in Wisconsin know how to drink. Oh my God. Whew.
Spotted cow beer.
So, but anyhow, I did a tasting and we got done. We were talking about it. I told these guys, first time I tasted on the finish, I got sweet tarts. And they said, man, we just were saying that. We just both got sweet tarts. I said, oh, everybody's palate's different. You never know. I mean, but
I got Twizzlers.
Twizzlers, there you go.
I just got a salt.
I'm sorry?
Got a
Butter?
butter.
Butter. Butter.
Not butter. I'm not about butter.
Thoughts, comments, questions? Any other questions? Again, it's hard to believe that's a 20-year-old Canadian rye, isn't it? Yeah. So I think that's lots of, we got dessert still, right? Okay, so I think that's the last one I'm gonna let you taste tonight. I wish I had more. Hopefully we can do this again when we got some more different ones to taste. But again, I can't thank Blair and Ethan enough for inviting me again to come to Brooksville. I always love coming here, and this is kind of a home away from home here the last couple of years. It's been great, and love the people, and enjoy doing this. I mean, you all been great. Thanks again for coming out. Thanks to Blair and Ethan. The food, not bad, huh? Not bad cuisine, huh? Big round for Ethan, gang, please. And his crew. His crew did a great job. Thank you, Ethan, and your staff. That was phenomenal. But again, my pleasure being here. I can't thank you enough. And I enjoy doing this, enjoy meeting new people and sharing a little bit about what I know and spreading the word of the bird. So, all right? So thank you.